Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Kristen, this is my booktube, and in today's video we are going to be taking a deep dive into the Odyssey. As I am filming this, Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey will be coming to theaters in just a couple days, so I wanted to take the opportunity to do a little bit of a deep dive into one of my special interest stories. I am a big fan of Greek mythology, Greek retellings, all of that fun stuff, and have had Stephen Fry's retelling of the Odyssey on my bookshelf for the last, year or so. So I decided to go ahead and read this retelling and really just let my hyperfixation take complete control. So all I really want to talk about right now is the Odyssey, and I'm going to make that your problem. Now, this is not going to be any sort of exhaustive overview of the Odyssey myth. I didn't go back and read other translations of the Odyssey for this. All of my notes are based on the Stephen Fry version and whatever else I could remember off the top of my head. And there are so many different variations of different parts of this story from different versions, different translations, different retellings, all of that stuff. We would be here for days if I were to sit here and try to cover literally every aspect of the Odyssey and how it's evolved for the last 3,000 years. So instead, this is going to be a plot summary of the Odyssey as told by Stephen Fry. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a really good, comprehensive retelling of the Odyssey. He made it pretty fun at times, so I think that it's a good source for this video. And I'm also just doing this for fun, so I don't really need to have 1,000 different sources before diving into this video. And though I will be using Stephen Fry's version of the Odyssey for my main source material for this video, as I mentioned, there are some things that I kind of want to chime in on with the versions of some of the myths that I am more familiar with that maybe Stephen Fry didn't go with in his book, but we are not going to go down every single rabbit hole or twist and turn that these myths can take, because like I said, we will be here forever if we do that. So hopefully if I achieve my goal and I do what I intend to do, even if you know nothing about Greek mythology, nothing about the Odyssey or any of the characters in it, you still should be able to follow what's going on. And hopefully by the end of this video, you guys will be able to understand why I love this story so much and why it has been so enduring and culturally impactful for the last 3,000 years. Now, as I mentioned, I am filming this before the movie even comes out. It comes out this weekend, and I am going to see it opening weekend. So I will not have any commentary on the movie in this video, unfortunately, but my hope is that this can serve as a nice little refresher video. If maybe there's someone who's going to see the Odyssey, doesn't feel like reading it before going to see it, and just wants a video to pop on to refresh your memory of what exactly happens in the Odyssey. Even though there is a pretty good chance that this video will end up being longer than the movie is. So that is very much a possibility, but I'm gonna try to make it as brief as possible without losing any of the details that matter. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I do have 33 pages of notes in front of me, so yeah, it might take a while to get through this all, but we will get there in the end. So before we just dive on into the book, there is a little bit of background that I feel like is necessary to know about it, starting with the fact that the Odyssey is one of two major Greek epics that are attributed to Homer, the other one being the Iliad, and the Iliad covers the entire Trojan War, while the Odyssey covers what happens after the Trojan War and specifically follows Odysseus's journey to get back home. That is why the story is named for him. The Odyssey obviously is named for Odysseus because it is all about his journey to get home to his wife Penelope, his son Telemachus, and his kingdom of Ithaca. And as with the Odyssey, the Iliad is also part of the Greek epic poem tradition, which were both stories that were intended to be told orally to parties of guests, elites having dinner, that kind of thing. Which is funny because that is something that happens in the Odyssey. They have these bards that entertain people at dinner. So when that comes up later, it's kind of almost like a meta moment because those bards in the story would be the ones who would be singing this poem to people dining in palaces and things like that. But as such, with oral traditions, there is no one correct version of the Odyssey or the Iliad. There are so many variations to very small plot details of who does what action, all the way up to disputes about lineage and who is related to who in what way and things like that. So if I say something that doesn't really align with the version that you're most familiar with, just know that I'm probably just thinking of a different translation, different retelling or something like that. And I can't really cover them all without just confusing everyone involved. So my apologies, but feel free to share any different versions of details in the story that you know that I don't cover down below for other people to read, for me to read, because there are some very interesting ones, I will say. Okay, so with that, I think that is enough to at least get us going with the Odyssey. So we'll go ahead and just jump in to the story, and I'm going to be following the timeline that Stephen Fry does in his book as well. It may feel a little chaotic at first just because we're telling the story from a couple different perspectives, but once it meets all back up about halfway through, I promise it'll become much easier to follow. So we're going to introduce some characters, and there are a lot of characters in this book. I also found this Odyssey shirt in my closet that I totally forgot that I have. So this felt like a good shirt to wear for this video. It just says the Odyssey, what? You can't really see the bottom, but it just says the Odyssey of Homer, and it has Zeus like throwing down some lightning. And I got it from out of print years ago, but I totally forgot that I even owned this shirt. So I'm glad I found it in my closet for this video. All right, so we're gonna start with introducing some of the main characters in this book. Obviously, first up, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Odysseus himself. And yes, I did take a lot of these artistic renditions of the characters that I could from Epic the Musical, the animatics. I will list down below the artists for each of the pictures that I used, but I just feel like these are a lot more engaging and fun to look at than if I were to just pull like marble busts and things for you to look at while I talk about the story. So I hope you enjoy my choice of art for this breakdown, but I will credit all of the artists in the description below. You should go check them out. You should also check out Epic the Musical because it is one of my favorite retellings of the Odyssey, if I'm being quite honest. And then Odysseus's wife is Penelope. I scooted them down a little bit because we're gonna have some gods at play in a bit, and it would feel weird to put the gods below the humans in this story, so apologies for the continuity. But together, Penelope and Odysseus have one son named Telemachus, or as I've heard some people call him, telekinesis, telemarketing, telegraph, which is also funny because that prefix of tele is the same prefix that his name starts with. I forget what it means, but Stephen Fry talks about it how the tele portion of his name does relate to telephone, telegraph, all of those different things. So technically people aren't that wrong for calling him things like telephone and telegraph. There's not going to be nearly as much going on with like family trees in this plot summary video like in my Wuthering Heights video, but I still thought it would be nice to just put the family relations where there are some, just to kind of make it a little clearer. Odysseus and his family live on the island of Ithaca. At this point in history, Greece is not a united country. I mean, it's literal ancient history, so not that surprising, but just so we're all on the same page. Greece is essentially composed of a lot of city-states. So that's why you have a king of Athens, a king of Sparta, a king of Ithaca, a king of Crete. Like, they all rule over different areas of Greece. And though they have alliances and allegiances between them, they are not all united under one central ruler at this point. So another big character that we have in the Iliad as well as this story is King Agamemnon, who is the king of Mycenae. And this is where we're gonna have a few pictures that are not from Epic the Musical, because Epic the Musical does not really go into what happens with Agamemnon and Meneleus, his brother, after the Trojan War, but that is a big part of the Odyssey, at least for the first half of the book, so we do have to talk about it. And Agamemnon is married to Clytemnestra. Now, Clytemnestra and Agamemnon have 3 children together. Wait, no, they have 4 children. Oh my god, I forgot about one of them. Whoops. So Clytemnestra and Agamemnon have 4 children together. We're really only going to talk about 3 of them because the youngest one is so young in this story that they don't really play that big of a part, at least not in the Stephen Fry version. And I'm going to be so honest, I am not familiar enough with their name to even tell you what it is. I know it starts like chrysanthemum, but I would not be able to tell you what this child's name is. So we're just going to talk about their older siblings because they're of more consequence to the story anyway. So the 3 kids of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra that we are going to be talking about are Iphigenia, Electra, and Orestes. And Orestes, being the oldest boy, is the one who is in line for the throne. He is the heir to Mycenae when his father leaves for the Trojan War. Agamemnon has a brother named Meneleus, and he is the king of Sparta. And Menelaus is the one who is married to Helen of Troy, or Helen of Sparta if you want to go with like her more, I guess, accurate title, because she was originally Queen of Sparta with Menelaus before being dragged to Troy. Now, Helen and Menelaus do have several children together, one of which is named Hermione, which is where J.K. Rowling got the name for her character. She took a lot of names from Greek mythology, specifically the Iliad and the Odyssey, but yeah, that's where Hermione comes from. Hermione is the daughter of Menelaus and Helen. And then other characters that will become important in this first half of the story are Old King Nestor of Pylos. We're just gonna put him there for balance. And Cassandra, who is a princess of Troy. She's the daughter of King Priam of Troy and Queen Hecuba, and she is also a prophet of Apollo. He gave her divine sight. She needs to go up here for now. I mean, it makes sense. She's a prophet. She can see. She can hear from the gods. So yeah, this is our cast of characters for the first half of the book. I had like a list of 30 like prominent characters to put up pictures for, and I even cut it down from that. We're gonna start off with these guys. Don't worry, there is not going to be any need for you to memorize each character's name. I'm gonna be talking you through it, and I've got my handy dandy laser pointer so that we can stay on track with who I'm talking about. So Stephen Fry's version of the Odyssey opens with like a brief recap of what happened at the end of the Trojan War, which is important because it leads into everything that happens in the Odyssey. So that's where I'm gonna start too, but we will be going pretty fast through these last couple plot points, I guess you could say, in the Trojan War. So if you're interested in more detail and would be interested in me doing a video like this about the Iliad as well, just let me know. I can totally do that, but I wanted to do this one for the movie coming out. So we're doing them a little out of order, but it's fine. You'll have all the information you need to be able to follow what's going on, I promise. So the basics of how the Trojan War started come down to the decisions of basically one guy, Paris. Paris is a prince of Troy. He is the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, and that also means that he is the brother of Cassandra. He does not survive the Trojan War. That is why he is not really a character up on the wall, but he is the one that kicks everything off, because as the story goes, Paris is brought to the top of Mount Ida by Hermes to settle a dispute among goddesses, specifically between Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera. And he is to help them decide who is the most beautiful goddess. And he is supposed to award the winner with a golden apple. Now, I believe they all make promises to him of what they will give him. And what Aphrodite promises him is Helen. She tells him that if he chooses her, that she will help him take Helen back with him to Troy and will make her fall in love with him. Now, the old adage for Helen is that she is so beautiful, she's the face that launched 1,000 ships. She's supposed to be like the most gorgeous mortal woman on the face of the planet. So Paris, being a young man who is very enchanted by Helen, takes her up on the offer and gives her the golden apple. So Aphrodite keeps up her end of the bargain, and when Paris goes to visit Sparta and he is staying with them because they don't really have any reason to like not trust him, he like goes there under the guise of a diplomatic mission basically. So Aphrodite keeps her word and helps Paris kidnap Helen from Sparta and bring her back to Troy with him. There's also like this whole side story about like Paris's background and stuff like that, but that's not something that really comes up in the Odyssey at all. That's more in the Iliad, so we're gonna skip past that for now and maybe we'll come back to it another day. But Paris's kidnapping of Helen is what sets off the Trojan War in the first place. That's why she is the woman with the face that launched 1,000 ships and all of those descriptors that I'm sure everyone has heard a million times. So completely enraged at the kidnapping of his wife, Menelaus then, with his brother Agamemnon and several other kings throughout the like mainland Greece and then some of the islands surrounding Greece, they all form a coalition to help Menelaus go to Troy and bring Helen home. Now, you might be wondering why exactly, if these are all like city-states that are independently governed by different kings and things like that, why exactly they would be so willing to help Menelaus get Helen back. And there's a reason for that. Like everything in Greek mythology, there is a story behind that. So now we got to go into a little bit of background about Helen. So Helen, as I'm sure you probably heard with all of the discourse that's going on with the Odyssey and people clapping back at people being mad about the casting choices, Helen was hatched from an egg. Yeah, she was literally hatched from an egg. Her mother is Queen Leda of Sparta, and her father was Zeus. Now, if there is one thing that pretty much everyone knows about Zeus, if you are familiar with Greek mythology, even a little bit, is that Zeus is a sex pest. Zeus is always on the prowl for new partners, and he will do just about anything to get the sexual conquest that he desires. This is why, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna be making some references to the musical Epic. If you've never seen it or heard it and you like musicals, I definitely recommend it. The music is amazing. And the animatics, where I got a lot of this artwork from, are amazing as well. But there is a part in Epic where there's like a dig at Zeus's infidelity, where Hera is convinced to support Odysseus because Athena tells her that he hasn't cheated on his wife, which is not really canon to the actual myth itself, but it does make for a funny moment in that musical because Zeus is always cheating on her. And so Odysseus being faithful to his wife is enough to get her to be like, yeah, sure, I support him, let him go. And I just think that's very funny. Let's make sure this is still recording. What? What do you mean you're not recording? Alrighty, well, my microphone apparently wasn't recording for a good chunk of that, so my apologies, but we're back on track now. So I was basically saying that Helen's mother is Leda, Queen of Sparta, and Zeus decides that he wants her to be his next sexual conquest. Zeus, being the sex pest that he is, will do basically anything to sleep with the women that he wants to sleep with, and that includes turning himself into a swan, which apparently is what gets Leda. I don't know why that does it to her, but also, like, gods turning themselves into animals and then procreating with humans is not exactly super uncommon in Greek mythology. Another reference would be the Minotaur, but that's another myth for another day. Anyways, Zeus turns himself into a swan and he impregnates Leda, and that is how Helen is hatched from an egg. Helen is actually one of 2 eggs that Leda lays. I guess she lays the egg. I don't know. I don't know how exactly that works, but it's also not real, so I don't have to think about the logistics that much. But what's important to know is that Leda laid 2 eggs, and each of them contained a set of twins. One egg contained Helen and her sister Clytemnestra. That's right. Agamemnon, Meneleus, brothers, Clytemnestra and Helen, sisters. And the other egg contained their brothers Castor and Pollux. And Castor and Pollux are actually the twins that are in like the Gemini zodiac sign. They are the Gemini twins. And as per usual, there are variations of like who fathered what egg. There's like variants where the king of Sparta is the father of one egg and Zeus is the father of the other. There's also a version where Leda is not the one that lays the egg, that it is actually Nemesis that gets pregnant and lays these eggs, and Leda and her husband just raise the literal hatchlings as their own. So there are variations on who the parents of Clytemnestra and Helen and Castor and Pollux actually are. But for simplicity's sake, we're gonna say that Zeus is the father of Clytemnestra and Helen, and that Leda is their mother. Castor and Pollux don't really come into this story that much, so we're done talking about them. I just think it's interesting that they're the Gemini twins, and I wanted to share that with you. So when Helen becomes eligible for marriage, she is already renowned for her beauty. She is said to be the most beautiful mortal woman in the world. And as such, there are many suitors that vie for her hand, including obviously Menelaus, because he's the one that eventually marries her. His brother Agamemnon, and even Odysseus is there as well. This is before Penelope, so Penelope's not in the picture yet. But Odysseus does throw his hat in the ring for marrying Helen, which I mean makes sense because being a princess of Sparta, you're gonna have like neighboring kingdoms with eligible sons sending their sons over there to try to marry her, even if she's not the most beautiful woman in the world. Depending on the source, the number of suitors can be as high as 36. And as we know, Menelaus is the one that's eventually chosen. But the king of Sparta has a problem. The king of Sparta and Helen's technically stepfather is afraid to announce that Menelaus is a suitor that he chooses for Helen for fear of fights breaking out over her. So, knowing that he does not really have a chance of winning Helen's hand, Odysseus goes up to the king of Sparta with a plan. Odysseus is always plotting, always scheming. He's always got a plan in this little noggin of his. And he tells the king of Sparta that he will tell him this plan if he gives him his permission to court his niece Penelope. The king agrees. His plan is very simple. He says that all of the suitors should swear an oath of loyalty to whomever is chosen as Helen's husband. They all have to swear that they will not retaliate against them, and if there ever were to come a time when someone were to, I don't know, kidnap her from her rightful husband, they would all spring into action to help bring her back to her rightful home. Now, years go by. As we mentioned, they end up having some kids. Agamemnon ends up marrying Helen's sister, Clytemnestra. They have some kids. Odysseus marries Penelope. They have Telemachus, and everything is going fairly well, I'd say, for most of the people on this wall, until Paris rolls up to Sparta and steals Helen away. This then triggers the oath that they all swore years and years ago when Meneleus was first chosen as her husband, and therefore they all have a duty to help Meneleus get Helen back. That is where the coalition is formed. They're not just doing it out of respect for Menelaus or anything like that, but it is more so about them making good on an oath that they swore years prior. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is respect for Menelaus as well as Agamemnon. Agamemnon's literally known as the king of men. That is how powerful he is seen. He is the leader of the entire coalition of the Greeks throughout the Trojan War. Odysseus does his part. He has his little plots and schemes to help them in the war. Nestor is a very wise and respected king as well as a respected warrior. So he does a lot. Menelaus is also a respected warrior. So there is a lot of input put in from the other kings, but at the end of the day, Agamemnon is known as the king of men, and he is the one who has the final say. So during this time, Odysseus becomes the king of Ithaca, has Telemachus, as I mentioned, and he ends up going to a seer, and he gets a prophecy stating that if he were to go and fight in a war, he would not return for many, many years. So when he heard about Helen being kidnapped, the gears started turning in his head, and he realized that that means that he's going to be called upon to go fight in this war. And if the oracle is correct, which they usually are, he is about to be drug away from his homeland and he will not be able to return for many, many years. So naturally, he is desperate to avoid that fate, and he decides to pretend that he has gone completely mad. He basically gets his whole kingdom in on it, and he goes full into this act that he has completely lost his mind in the years since Helen and Menelaus got married, thinking that that would be enough for them to just kind of leave him alone and be like, oh man, that's so sad. He used to be so brilliant, but he's lost his mind. I guess he can't fight in a war or anything. But as most people who are familiar with Greek mythology will tell you, there is no outrunning your fate. It's you can fight tooth and nail against the future, but your fate is basically carved in stone, and there is no escaping that. So naturally, as they're getting ready to go to war, Agamemnon and Menelaus notice that Odysseus and his men haven't shown up yet, so they decide to sail to Ithaca and see what exactly is going on. When they arrive in Ithaca, they start hearing the tales of the Mad King and how sad it is that he lost his mind. And when they make it to the fields, they see Penelope holding little baby telemarketing, while Odysseus is using a plow with one ox and one donkey. And because they have different gaits, the line that they're plowing in the soil is not straight. It's all jagged, not what you want when you're trying to till a field. On top of that, he is sowing his fields with salt, which, if you know anything about agriculture, is a good way to make your soil just not grow anything ever again. And all the while, he is just whistling while he is plowing this jagged line and just filling his soil with salt. Then I don't remember who it is, but knowing how cunning and deceptive that Odysseus can be, they decide to really put to the test if he is actually mad or not. They take little baby Telemachus and they put him in the path of the plow. The logic there being that if he is actually as insane as he is wanting us to believe, he won't stop plowing. He will just keep whistling and he will plow right over his child and kill him. Now, obviously, because Odysseus is not actually crazy and he's just faking it, he turns the plow at the last minute, and that seals his fate. They know that he's lying. They know that he's not actually lost his mind, and he is forced to gather his men and go fight in the Trojan War. And this might not seem that important to the Odyssey, but I think that it's very important context to have before really diving into the story, just because it really shows how much Odysseus did not want to go to Troy in the first place. And I feel like that just makes everything else that happens in the Odyssey a lot more sad, honestly. It makes me sad because this man really did try his hardest to not go to war. He tried in vain, like so many people do in Greek mythology, to avoid his fate and change what is written in the stars for him. And he can't. It is a classic tragic Greek moment, to be quite honest. Alrighty, so that's basically all I wanted to fill you in on pre-Trojan War. So we can now do a big time jump, about 10 years to the end of the Trojan War. You heard that right. Before the journey home even begins, it's already been 10 years. We are well within the prophecy that Odysseus received. He has already been gone from home 10 years before he even starts to sail home. But what we really care about at the end of the Trojan War is the Trojan horse. So it should surprise absolutely no one that the Trojan horse itself is the brainchild of Odysseus. And what they did is they built this giant wooden horse with a concealed trapdoor in the belly where a group of warriors could hide inside without being seen. So while the group of soldiers are waiting inside of the Trojan horse, the rest of the several armies that are involved on the Greek side of the Trojan War, they start tearing down their encampments, packing up everything, boarding their ships, and they move everything out of sight. So the next day when the Trojan watchmen wake up, all they see on the plains of Ilium is the Trojan horse. All of the encampments, all of the ships, all of the soldiers that have been there for 10 years have now cleared out, and it seems like they have given up and turned around and gone home, leaving the Trojan horse as their peace offering. Now, another thing that's important to know about Troy itself is it was a walled city. So that is part of what made it such a long war, because it was intensely fortified. It had these giant city walls that were basically impenetrable. And I believe, if I remember right, most of the fighting, if not all of it, took place on the plains outside of the city. So the city itself was impacted by the war, yes, but largely still standing, still intact. A lot of people still lived there, including the entire royal family minus Hector and Paris. They both die in the Trojan War, but everyone else is still there, at least at this point. We'll get there. We'll get there. It's like they won't be there for long, but as of right now, they're still there. So the Trojans, thinking that the Greeks have finally given up, have finally become weary and tired of this decade-long war, packed up and gone home. Thinking that they're in the clear, they decide to open the gates of the city and bring this wooden horse inside. So they bring it into the interior of the city and then lock the doors back behind it. The soldiers inside of the horse stay in there until nightfall, and they wait until everyone is gone to sleep to open the hatch in the belly of the horse, and they slip out into the city, opening up the gates to let the rest of the Greek armies inside. So now that the Greeks are within the walls of Troy itself, they literally start pillaging and just burning the city to the ground. This rendition of Cassandra actually has, you can kind of see, Troy is literally burning in the background, and that's because this is set at the end of the Trojan War. And it is just like absolute carnage in Troy. They burn the city down, they kill King Priam, the son of Achilles kills the son of Hector, who is a literal baby, by dropping him off of the wall of the city. And Cassandra is one of the only Trojans to survive the sacking of Troy. Cassandra is also a very interesting character in Greek mythology because she is a priestess of Apollo. At least the version of the myth that I know goes that Apollo was very infatuated with her and gave her the gift of prophecy. But when she rejected his advances, he then cursed her, so that though she does have the gift of prophecy and she can see precise events that will happen in the future, she is cursed in that literally no one will ever believe her. No matter how much she foretells the future accurately, Apollo has made it to where no one will ever take her prophecy seriously. So she's literally like just wailing in the background of all of the things that are going to happen, both in the Odyssey and in the Iliad. Like, in the Iliad, when Priam, Hector, and Paris are, like, talking about the war and stuff, she's literally in the back being like, Troy is never gonna survive this, everything's gonna burn down, we're all gonna die. And they're just like, oh, there goes Cassandra, just being Cassandra. And she does the same thing in the Odyssey, too. And that's also, I believe, why she's, like, pulling at her hair, because that's gotta be so infuriating to always be right, always know what's going to happen, and then just have literally no one believe you, which I mean is the point. It's a punishment, obviously. But at the end of the Trojan War, as Troy is burning to the ground, just as she predicted, she is then sexually assaulted by, it's not Ajax, is it? She is sexually assaulted in the temple, I believe, by one of the Greek warriors. I can't remember exactly who it is, and I didn't write it down, unfortunately. But that's not super important. The important thing to know is that she was sexually assaulted in the temple before being taken as a sex slave back to Mycenae with Agamemnon. So she is taken against her will with Agamemnon back to his homeland of Mycenae. All the while she is just screaming about how this is going to lead to her death and his death. In Fry's version, he says that her mother Hecuba is taken by Odysseus as a sex slave, but he gets tired of her wailing and just leaves her on a beach where she continues to wail and eventually like starts barking and turning into a dog. All while the city of Troy was just burning to the ground. A very dramatic way to end the Trojan War, but also a very final way to end it. And now the Greeks have thoroughly defeated the Trojans, and they are free to go back home. During the Trojan War, the gods also picked sides. I don't have pictures for all of them because, like I said, there are a lot of characters, and I didn't feel like putting pictures up for all of the gods because there are a lot of gods too. The ones that are players throughout the Odyssey, I will put up on the wall once they come into play, but I'm not doing all of the gods and things. But I do think that it is worth knowing what gods are on what side for the Trojan War as we go into the Odyssey. So obviously Athena and Hera opposed Troy because of the whole golden apple thing and Paris taking Helen. Also, Odysseus is like one of Athena's favorite mortals along with Diomedes. She really likes Odysseus and how like cunning and smart he is, even though he is a bit of a dummy sometimes with the things that he does, as we will see later. Hera mostly, I think, is just bitter over Paris choosing Aphrodite over her, and since Paris is a prince of Troy, that means that she is by default on the Greek side. Staying in that same vein, Aphrodite is obviously on the side of the Trojans because she likes Paris, because Paris told her that she's pretty. As you could probably figure out from me saying that Cassandra is a priestess of Apollo, Troy is also closely tied to Apollo, so he supports the Trojan side, as does his twin sister Artemis. Hermes doesn't really choose sides because he's the messenger of the gods. He's supposed to be like more impartial, but Odysseus is his great grandson, so he does lean towards the Greeks and he does have a special affinity for Odysseus. And it also kind of explains where Odysseus gets his ability to lie and deceive and be like cunning and honestly manipulative. That's kind of what happens when you got the blood of the trickster god running through your veins. Zeus himself doesn't really take a side in the Trojan War. He kind of sees himself as like above it all. And Fry says that he almost sees himself as like an impartial referee while the other mortals and stuff like hash it out. Oh, I forgot to mention, obviously Athena is also on the side of the Greeks because Athens. Athens is literally her city, in addition to her affinity for Odysseus and Diomedes. And Hades is also impartial because all the dead souls come to him in either way, so he just hopes that it is a long and bloody war so that he can get as many souls as possible. There are a couple more intricacies to the allegiances between the gods and the different sides in the Trojan War, but those are the main ones that are impactful for the story going forward, or at least are good context for the story going forward. So after the sacking of Troy, while everything is burning down, people are trying to evacuate the city, the Greeks are just like plundering and pillaging and trying to get as many riches extracted from the city as possible. And they are starting to load up all of the treasures and things onto their ships and prepare to sail back home. I don't know exactly how many ships like everyone came to the war with, but we know that Odysseus has 12 ships with about 40 to 50 men on it. So oftentimes people will say that he has 600 men on 12 ships. And obviously, for the purposes of our story, that's really the only fleet that we're going to be mainly concerned about. So after leaving Troy, Odysseus and his men set sail and they first land outside the city of Ismaris in modern day Bulgaria, Macedonia, or northern Greece. Obviously, because this is mythology, the exact location is not super precise, which is why I don't really have a map up here, because though it can be interesting to look at some of the plotted pathways, I'll throw a couple up on screen right now because it is interesting to see the plotted pathways that people have deduced for Odysseus and his journey, and it really shows like how all over the place he was throughout this entire journey. But for our purposes, I feel like the content of the story is more important than knowing exactly geographically where he is supposed to be at any point in time, because he's just like bouncing all around the Mediterranean throughout this story. So in any case, they first land basically in the north of Greece, and once they find a city, they just start pillaging once again. This city was not in any way, shape, or form part of the Trojan War, so they were not anticipating any sort of attack. And they just like start looting and killing people, and it is like pretty ruthless, honestly. I don't know if it's because they're like hardened by 10 years of war or whatnot, but even Odysseus doesn't really show any mercy to any of the people of this city until a priest of Apollo is brought before him, and then he decides to spare him because he doesn't really want to anger Apollo today, which, I mean, good choice. It's never a good idea to anger a god if you can help it. Odysseus tells his men that that's enough. We need to chill out a bit, maybe stop killing people for a couple seconds, and he orders his men to let the priest of Apollo go. The priest then starts like vigorously thanking him for his mercy. And to be honest, I think it's less so about mercy for the priest and more so about the fact that the Greeks have already made Apollo quite angry. I mean, they burned down Troy, the city that supported him and that he supported during the war. The Greeks have sexually assaulted Cassandra, who is one of his priestesses. So them killing this priest of Apollo could potentially be a third strike that would bring the wrath of Apollo and potentially his sister Artemis and other gods down upon them. And Odysseus is at least smart enough to think about that and say, you know what? I think it's enough. I think we've killed enough people. Let's let him go. But in any case, to show his thanks, the priest gives Odysseus some of their legendary wine. The priest says that this wine is so flavorful and delicious that Dionysus himself would have a hard time finding a better vintage. The priest then gives them 12 cases of this wine, and it's basically like a wine concentrate, and he tells Odysseus that you need to mix 1 part of this wine with 20 parts of water so that it is diluted correctly, because it is a very, very strong wine. And if you do not dilute it properly and you just try to drink the concentrate, it will just knock you out. You will just pass out immediately. He then demonstrates to Odysseus how to mix the wine, and they have a couple glasses together before Odysseus gets ready to depart. After this exchange, Odysseus is over all the pillaging and he is ready to just get on with the journey and get back home. But as he is getting ready to give the order for them to pack up everything and leave, his right-hand man and lieutenant Eurylochus convinces him to let him stay just one more night. Like, I imagine him arguing that they've earned a bit of pillaging after 10 years at war, but it works on Odysseus and they stay one more day so the men can continue their reign of terror on this city. Now, you might be thinking that that's a pretty ballsy move for the lieutenant to essentially push back on the commands of not only his superior militarily, but also his literal king. But these two have a quite special relationship. Yes, they're friends. They're brothers in arms, if you want to call it that, but they're also literal brothers-in-law. Eurylochus is married to Odysseus's sister, so they are also family. And that is partly why Eurylochus gets away with some of the stuff he gets away leeway within the Odyssey. Not that he's not loyal to Odysseus, he is loyal to Odysseus, but he just has more leeway with him, if you will. He has the ability to question him and push back on the decisions that he makes in a way that the other soldiers do not, by virtue of the relationship that they share. At least that's my interpretation of it. But they really should have just stuck with Odysseus's plan to just go ahead and leave and not stay an extra day, because little beknownst to them, there are survivors that escaped the pillaging of the city, and they have made it to the next city over and are rallying troops from their neighboring city to come back and fight off the Ithacans that are attacking them. So, since they didn't leave immediately like Odysseus wanted them to, they end up being attacked and they lose 70 men right off the bat. First stop on their way home. They already lost 70 of their men because they couldn't stop pillaging and just be happy with the spoils that they already got. Not a great start to the journey home, but it only gets worse because as they are getting ready to set sail and leave, the sky suddenly darkens, as if a god sent a storm to block their path. In Fry's retelling, he says that this is the doing of Hera, who desperately wants to scuttle Aeneas's ship. Now, Aeneas is one of the only other survivors out of Troy, and he is another figure that's very important in both Greek and bridging over into Roman mythology as well, because in his story, he ends up leaving Troy and sailing over to what is now Italy. And down the line, like generations later, his descendants include Romulus and Remus, the famous twins at the center of the foundation myth of Rome, Rome being named after Romulus. And this journey is also central to Virgil's Aeneid, named for Aeneas, obviously, and is not really an important plot point for the story of the Odyssey, but it is interesting how it ties together Greek mythology into the foundation myth of Rome itself. It's like it's all connected, you know? So Hera is upset that Aeneas is able to escape and she wants to try to stop him. So she goes to Zeus and tries to get him to cast a storm to stop him. Zeus refuses to do so. So she goes directly to the wind god Aeolus. Actually, we can go ahead and put Aeolus up there. I got a picture of Aeolus. Take a look right here in this bag. So Hera goes to the wind god Aeolus and asks him to cast the storm instead, and he obliges. The storm impacts basically all of the Greeks that stayed to pillage Troy and gather their spoils and stuff. There are a few ships that make it out before the storm hits, but it's only the ones who, as soon as the city fell, just packed up and left. Basically, all of the ones that stayed to loot the city are hit by the storm and impacted in some way, shape, or form. Odysseus himself has 9 ships that are damaged by this storm. Odysseus doesn't lose any men in the storm, unlike Meneleus. Meneleus does lose, I think, a ship and some men. I could be wrong on that, but he does lose some men in that storm, as does Agamemnon, I'm pretty sure. Meanwhile, Cassandra's in the ship while the storm is raging, saying, "We'll survive the storm, but we're gonna die when we get to your palace." Because the storm ends up destroying their sails on their ships, Odysseus orders his men to start rowing until they see land again. And it's at this point in Fry's book that he starts just giving us some background on the gods in general. And it's all very interesting, and I did enjoy reading it. But for brevity's sake, I'm going to kind of skim through that stuff so that we can get through the story a little bit faster. So I'm only going to tell you the bits that I think are important to move the story along. And it mostly has to do with Agamemnon and his family once he returns back to Mycenae. Now, in sharp contrast to Penelope, as we will see later, Clytemnestra, not exactly looking forward to her husband returning home. She is very angry at him for good reason, because one of the things that happens at the very beginning of the Trojan War as they are trying to sail to Troy is that when they set off to try to go to Troy, they have no wind for a little bit. It is just like still completely no wind at all for like weeks on end. So Agamemnon has a seer that he takes with him places named Calchas. I didn't print out a picture of him. You don't really need to know anything about him other than he's a seer. And he tells Agamemnon that the reason why there are no winds is because he killed a stag that was a favorite of Artemis, and she is angry. So she has basically put a halt to their sailing plans until he makes it right somehow. And the way that Calchas says that he can make it right to Artemis is to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia. So what he does is he tells Clytemnestra that Achilles, the famous Greek hero that is so beautiful that he is able to pass himself as a woman for a little bit in the Iliad, he tells Clytemnestra that he wants to marry Iphigenia in order to get her to bring Iphigenia to their location. Now, obviously, this is a lie. Achilles has no interest in marrying Iphigenia, and once they arrived, they sacrificed Iphigenia on a rock in order to get favorable winds to Troy. And this is something that Clytemnestra cannot and will not ever forgive him for. This planted and sprouted the seeds of hatred that she has for her husband, and she's had 10 years to let him fester, grow, and plot her revenge. In his absence, she did get a new lover. His name is Aegisthus. It's a whole story. He's like technically the cousin of Agamemnon. There was like a whole succession dispute, and Aegisthus essentially usurped the throne of Mycenae from Agamemnon's father, and Aegisthus ruled jointly with his father over Mycenae until Agamemnon came back and toppled him off of the throne. And that's how Agamemnon became the king of Mycenae. However, in his absence, Aegisthus has taken up residence with Clytemnestra and is essentially the de facto king now. They have also had a couple of kids together, and together Clytemnestra and Aegisthus are actively plotting how they're gonna kill Agamemnon when he arrives home. So she is once again very valid in her wailing, being like, you don't need to worry about the storm, you're gonna survive the storm, because you're gonna die when you get home. We're both gonna die in your palace once we arrive back to Mycenae. It's just that, once again, her curse is that no one believes her, no matter how correct she is, and she is 1000% correct. So just like Cassandra said, they make it back to Mycenae, and Agamemnon's return is like the final nail in the coffin for Clytemnestra, because not only is she still angry with him about what happened with Iphigenia, but this man had the audacity to bring back a sex slave into their home and just expect her to be cool with it. So with that, she tells Aegisthus that, yeah, we're murdering him like now, like as soon as his guard is down, we're gonna murder him. So being that he just got off of a boat, probably for days on end without showering, one of the first things that Agamemnon does is take a bath. And while he is in the bath, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus throw what I think is essentially a fishing net over the top of him so he can't get out, and they just start stabbing him in the tub. All while their 3 children, well, 3, but Iphigenia is not there. It's these 2 and then the chrysanthemum one that I didn't print out. But Electra, Orestes, and then the other one, chrysanthemum, whatever their name is. Oh, I did write down the name. Chrysanthemius. They all see it happen. So Electra, Orestes, and then Chrysanthemius watch as their mother and her lover murder their father in the bathtub, like as soon as he arrives home. And rightfully so, they are afraid of what their mother might do next. And along with the help of some of the servants in the house, the 3 of them escape from Mycenae and do not see their mother again for quite a few years. We will get to catch up with them later in the story, but for now, all you need to know is that they got away as their mother and her lover killed Agamemnon, as well as Cassandra. Cassandra was right in that regard too. Basically, right after they murdered Agamemnon, they killed her as well. And with Agamemnon gone, Clytemnestra marries her lover, and Aegisthus becomes the king of Mycenae once again. We're now going to travel over to the island of Ithaca and catch up a bit with Penelope and Telemachus, and we're also going to fast forward a little bit. It has now been 20 years since Odysseus left for the Trojan War, and their palace is overrun with suitors. There are 108 suitors trying to get Penelope to marry them. And over the years, Penelope has done a great job, honestly, distracting the suitors. She has come up with reasons to delay. Odysseus's father, Laertes, who was the king before him, came back to rule in his place for a while, but now Laertes is getting very old and very feeble, and he can no longer reliably function as the king of Ithaca. Imagine that, a head of state who actually steps down when they get too old and feeble for the job. Would not happen in America, but in ancient Greece, apparently it does. But in any case, we now have 108 suitors that are posted up in the palace in Ithaca trying to get Penelope to choose one of them to marry. And she's come up with all of these different reasons as to why she can't make a selection. It was easier for her when Laertes was functioning as king because they had a king. But now that Laertes is getting older, what she's been using for her excuse is that she needs to prepare a funeral shroud for him because he is He's getting old and feeble, and that is part of the Greek burial custom, is a woven funeral shroud. And so that is what she dedicates her time to doing for a while. But Penelope's clever. You know, Odysseus, being the smarty pants he is, he wouldn't marry just anyone. He's got to have an intellectual equal, right? And that is Penelope. Penelope, though maybe unassuming, she's got some brains of her own. She's got some scheming in her. She can be a little deceptive. So when she tells people that she needs time to weave this funeral shroud, and she does, she works on it diligently during the day. At night, what she does is she unthreads all of the weaving that she does during the day, so that she basically has to start over each day, making the task last way longer than it needs to, essentially buying Odysseus some time by delaying her being forced to choose a new husband. However, unfortunately, one of her servants discovers what she's doing and rats her out, so she can't do that anymore, and she finishes the shroud and essentially just starts like hiding in her room. And I know this may seem like a long time to go without actually like talking about Odysseus, and from what I remember, I believe that this is where the Odyssey actually starts. I remember the Odyssey starting with the 108 suitors vying for Penelope's affection. I could be wrong on that because it's been a while since I've read any like translation of the Odyssey. That wasn't a retelling like Stephen Fry's, but I believe this is where the Odyssey starts. We really don't hear anything from Odysseus until like 6 books into the Odyssey, which is a long time to go without hearing anything about like the titular character. But I do think that all the other stuff that we talked about is important to know going into the story of the Odyssey. So I understand why Stephen Fry's retelling was structured the way it was, and why I thought it would be a good structure for my video about the Odyssey as well. So we cut to Telemachus, who is now about 20 years old. Remember, he was just a baby when Odysseus left. He is now grown into a fine young man. He is able to fight, and though he is still very young and quite inexperienced, he is still a pretty good fighter, honestly. So we cut to Telemachus, who is sitting near some of the suitors, and there are 2 main suitors that we are going to be talking about here, so I'm going to go ahead and put their pictures up on the wall. First off, we have Antinous. He's like one of the main leaders in the pack of suitors. He gives a lot of direction to them and is one of the main forces in rallying them behind certain causes and things, as we will get into a bit later. And then we also have Eurymachus, not to be confused with Eurylochus, even though their names start with the same 4 letters. Eurymachus is probably like the second most influential suitor in the Odyssey. He and Antinous do a lot of like plotting and scheming together, but Eurymachus is a lot more, I don't know, what word would I use to describe him? Snake-like, I guess. He is very deceptive, but he's not deceptive in the way that Odysseus is deceptive. Odysseus really reserves using deception and things like that to help his men or save his own skin, really out of like desperation. Eurymachus does it like anytime it's convenient for him, basically. So Telemachus is sitting in what is essentially like the main hall of the palace, and that is where all of the suitors hang out, like day in and day out. They're in there drinking, feasting, gambling, yelling. They're like constantly making noise, and these are the main 2 suitors that get named in the Odyssey. There are like a couple more that get mentioned, but these are really the 2 main players when it comes to the suitors. And Antinous is telling like some crude story to the suitors, and they're all like hooping and hollering about it, when a middle-aged man with a spear and gray eyes enters into the hall. And Telemachus goes to greet him, as any good host would do. And this is the theme that is reoccurring throughout the Odyssey. The idea of Xenia is very prevalent throughout Greek mythology. And Xenia has to do with not only being respectful as a host, but being a respectful guest as well. And clearly, from what I've already mentioned, the suitors, they're not great guests. They're very disrespectful. And that is like a big point of contention with the suitors, is that they are very much so not abiding by the laws of Xenia, which is basically like an affront to Zeus himself, because Zeus is like the god of Xenia and the god of like welcoming in strangers and things like that. There are other stories in Greek mythology of Zeus, as well as other gods, disguising themselves as mortals as beggars and things like that, and like basically testing humans on how kind they are to strangers and then punishing them if they are not sufficiently generous hosts. And fun fact, the term xenia is also where we get the term xenophobic. They have the same root to them. So when Telemachus goes up to greet this middle-aged man that has wandered into their hall, the man says that his name is Mentis and he is the king of the Taphians. But in actuality, it is Athena in a disguise. Athena is known for having gray eyes. So basically, anytime you hear someone mentioned as having gray eyes, it's a very good chance that it's actually Athena in disguise. And that's the case here with Mentis. She also disguises herself as Mentor, who is like a literal mentor for Telemachus. And the names Mentis, Mentor also tie back to Athena because Athena is the goddess of wisdom. And she is like a mentor herself, especially when it comes to watching over Telemachus while Odysseus is gone. And that's why she disguises herself as Mentor and Mentis, to kind of guide him without letting him know directly that he's dealing with a goddess. So as Telemachus starts talking to Mentis, aka Athena, Mentis tells him that he knows his father Odysseus, to which Telemachus kind of sadly corrects his present tense usage and says that more than likely his dad is dead. There's no way that he's still alive after this long. He had to have died at sea. Literally all of the other Greeks have returned home at this point except for the Ithacan fleet, leading literally everyone in Ithaca to believe that they all died. Mentis tells him that even though it seems probable, it is not for certain that his dad is actually dead. Mentis says that he's no prophet, but he could definitely see Odysseus being trapped on an island somewhere, unable to return home for some reason. He says that he is fairly certain that that is probably what happened and that Odysseus will in fact find his way home very soon. This is when Telemachus fills us in on how Laertes, Odysseus' father, had been ruling in his place, but he's getting kind of old now, so he can no longer function as the king of Ithaca, putting more pressure on Penelope to choose a suitor. Telemachus then starts remarking how none of the suitors are actually worth his mom's time, how they're all brutish, they're all pigs, they've disrespected their home in so many different ways. And he tells Mentis about the whole burial shroud thing and Penelope's clever plan to weave the shroud during the day only to pick out all of the stitches that she did at night when no one was watching, and how a servant girl found out, ratted her out, and now she is under immense pressure to finally choose a suitor. He says that she was working on that burial shroud for 3 years, and like honestly, as someone who crochets, I got blankets that are like 6 years old that I still haven't finished, so like honestly I believe that a burial shroud could take that long if my own incomplete crochet projects are any yardstick to measure by. It's at this point that Antinous cuts in and starts verbally berating Telemachus and Mentis, and he only backs down when Mentis stands up and Antinous realizes that he's not nearly as feeble and old and short as he thought he was. And Mentis then tells Telemachus that he should set sail and go to some of the other kingdoms to try to seek out information on where his father is. And he tells him that he should tell the suitors that they can only choose a new king for Ithaca and a new husband for his mother once they are certain that Odysseus is actually dead. At the same time, there is a bard in the hall who is singing a song about the Trojan War and Achilles and all of the heroes that fought in the war. And when Telemachus turns back to Mentis, Mentis is just gone. And later that night, Telemachus has a dream that Mentis is not in fact a man like he presented himself, but is the goddess Athena in disguise. Which, like, yeah, bud, that's exactly who it is. At least in Stephen Fry's version of the Odyssey, Telemachus is not really great on picking up symbols from the gods. At least he like kind of convinces himself that they're not actually signs from the gods. Because this happens again later where he's like on the right track and then he's just like, but that's crazy though. That's not actually what's happening. It's like, yeah, bud, it is. That is exactly what's happening. You should listen to the dreams that you're having. Then Stephen Fry talks about how when he wakes up the next morning, he's like taller and more like clear skinned than he was before, almost as if like Athena in his dream kind of like pushed him out of like that awkward late teens, early 20s phase into like full-blown manhood almost. He says that he's taller, his skin's clearer, and his eyes were shining a lot more than they did the day before. And all these changes gave him the courage that he needed to set off on this fact-finding mission that Mentis set for him and hunt down some information about his father. So the first place he goes is King Nestor's home of Pylos. And this is just a side note, but when I was reading Stephen Fry's version of the Odyssey, it just made me laugh because he has this like whole paragraph talking about how old Nestor is. Like, don't get me wrong, he is old, but it's just so funny that like Stephen Fry, my professor in undergrad, and like every other retelling or Greek myth that I come across that talks about Nestor, it just harps on about how old he is. I don't remember ever seeing an exact age for Nestor, but like at the beginning of the Trojan War, he's described as wise old King Nestor. At the end of the Trojan War, he is also wise old King Nestor. And apparently when Telemachus makes it to Pylos and starts talking to him, Stephen Fry's just harping on about how deep the creases around his eyes and stuff are. And I just think it's funny that like the one thing that everyone harps on Nestor about, aside from him being wise, is the fact that he is just ancient. But I guess surprisingly spry because he was still like fighting in the Trojan War, and he is described in Fry's version of the Odyssey as like having really like lively eyes that shine, and that he walks upright without a cane. So clearly he's like got good mobility, but he just looks super old. Like, I don't know. I just think it's funny how much people harp on about how old Nestor is. Not really that important to the plot of the story at all. Just a funny tidbit of information that has always made me laugh. And is like one of the main things that stuck with me through my Greek literature class in undergrad was just that Nestor is super old. In all stages of the war, Nestor is very old. Telemachus then asks Nestor if he knows anything of Odysseus from after the war. And unfortunately, Nestor doesn't. I believe he was one of the first people to leave Troy, if I remember correctly. I don't think he was really interested in like the pillaging part that happened after the war. But in any case, he doesn't really know what happened to Odysseus after the war. Instead, Nestor starts asking about Penelope and the suitors and all of that stuff. So Telemachus just has to fill him in on what's going on in Ithaca. And Nestor tells him that he should try visiting Meneleus and Helen and asking them if they know anything about Odysseus. And Nestor ends up sending one of his sons along with Telemachus over there as well, just so I guess he has someone to travel with. They seemingly become pretty good friends though, so I don't think that Telemachus is really opposed to it at all. But in any case, the two of them set off for Sparta next to talk to Menelaus and Helen. And upon arriving to their big opulent palace, they are bathed and fed by the staff, and Menelaus begins talking about the men that he fought with in Troy, not knowing at this point that he's talking to Telemachus and Nestor's son. And that's more than likely because Helen had not entered the room yet, and it's kind of like a custom, I guess, to save introductions of strangers in your house until everyone has gathered in the room. So they're basically just like making small talk about the Trojan War until Helen enters the room, and that's why he doesn't really know who he's talking to. He's just kind of like relaying war stories to what he sees as two young boys who probably grew up on stories of the Trojan War. Telemachus then asks Menelaus about Odysseus specifically, and Menelaus tells him that no one really knows what happened to Odysseus after the fall of Troy, just that his boats got blown off course, just like most of the Greeks did, because of the storm that Aeolus sent at the behest of Hera to try to get back at Aeneas. Vengeful gods all around. And just as he's relaying that is when Helen enters the room, and she immediately recognizes that Telemachus looks like Odysseus and that Nestor's son looks like Nestor. So she knows immediately who they are. Pisistratus is the name of Nestor's son, if you want to know that. That's a mouthful for me, so I'm just going to keep calling him Nestor's son. And once this revelation happens, Menelaus and Helen both are very excited to see them. They start singing the praises of Odysseus about his spirit, how smart he is, how cunning he is. Helen tells a story about how one time when she was was trapped in the palace in Troy, that Odysseus dressed up as a beggar to sneak in and tell her news of her husband Meneleus and how much that meant to her, and how he also tried to undo the spell that Aphrodite had placed upon her to forget her homeland of Sparta and fall in love with Paris and Troy itself. Menelaus then starts recounting their own treacherous journey that lasted 7 years, so they've only been home for 3 years at this point. And he told them that at one point they were stuck in Egypt and marooned for 20 days, and Menelaus was walking across the shore when he spotted a shimmering figure on the beach, and he figured it had to be an immortal of some kind. And when she spots him on the beach, she lectures him for staying there, and Menelaus tells her that they don't really have a choice, that they can't leave no matter how hard they try. And she tells Menelaus that what he needs to do is speak with her father, Proteus, or he's also known as the Old Man of the Sea, and ask him what they need to do to get back on course for home. She tells him that it will not be easy, and what they need to do is find him in his cave where he sleeps at night. And Menelaus, along with 4 of his strongest men, will have to hold him tight, and that once they grab him, he will start changing forms. And they just need to hold on as tight as they can until he expends himself of all of his energy, and then they will be able to ask him the questions that they need to. It's very reminiscent of Achilles' mother, Thetis, in the Iliad. When Achilles' father, Peleus, is trying to capture Thetis, he basically has to do the same thing. He has to hold on to her as she changes forms until she eventually tires out, and then he's able to actually speak to her. And eventually they get married and they have Achilles, and that's Achilles' origin story. And I feel like there's at least one other myth where this like idea of holding on to an immortal being as they shapeshift until they just give up is another thing that happens as well. But I can't remember what other myth it would be in. I remember it happening with Thetis, but I feel like there's someone else that it happens with too. I just can't remember who. But it's interesting that it happens more than once in Greek mythology. But once again, there's no like plot significance to that. I just think it's interesting that it happens in the Iliad with Thetis and in the Odyssey with the Old Man of the Sea. But anyways, once they do this with the Old Man of the Sea, he will tell them whatever they want to know. And then she reveals that her name is Eidothea, or Ido, before disappearing. Menelaus then follows her instructions exactly. He gathers the 4 men needed. He finds his way to the cave. She also gave them some seal skins because the cave is inhabited by seals, so that they can like cover themselves with the seal skin and not be noticed immediately. And they made their way into the cave to wait for the Old Man of the Sea to come back home. And when he does, and he is fast asleep, Menelaus and his men spring into action, grabbing him and holding on for dear life as he changes from a lion to a serpent to a leopard to a boar and finally to a tree before returning to his original form and giving up. And when they ask him why they have been marooned on this beach for so long, he tells them that it is because they failed to make the appropriate sacrifices to Zeus and the other gods after the sacking of Troy and before heading back home. And on top of that, they also enriched themselves beyond the needs of literally any man. So now, no matter how hard they try, they will never make it home until they make the appropriate sacrifices. He then asks the Old Man of the Sea what the fate has been of the rest of the Achaeans that fought in the war with them. And he tells them that at this point, 7 years after the fall of Troy, all of the Achaeans have made it home aside from 3. Ajax the Lesser, who was the Greek that assaulted Cassandra in the temple, he was killed for that. Agamemnon, who was murdered by Clytemnestra, which hits Menelaus very hard because that is his brother. So that deeply upsets him. And of course, Odysseus of Ithaca, who is trapped on the island of Calypso. And she is in love with him and refuses to let him leave, just as Mentis foretold. Athena keeps watch over Odysseus, so Athena knew where he was. She just can't really interfere for reasons we'll get into later. But essentially, Calypso has kept him trapped on her island because she is in love with him. She is basically forcing him to stay there and be her lover, while he dreams of just returning home to Ithaca. The Old Man of the Sea tells Menelaus that Odysseus has been stuck there for years at this point, and he has lost all of his crew, leaving him the only survivor from his entire entire fleet of 600 men, and that he has no way to sail home. All of his ships have been destroyed, and he is not sure if he will ever be able to leave. Okay, and my battery's about to die, so we'll be back in a sec. Athena, batters in the arena. Alrighty, we are back. All of my stuff started dying, so I decided to take a break for dinner, let my batteries charge back up a little bit, but we are back now. And we have also added some more gods and goddesses to the wall. We've got Calypso here, Athena, we already had Aeolus, and then Zeus. We cut to Olympus, where Athena is trying to appeal to Zeus to help Odysseus escape from Calypso. And after arguing her case, Zeus does agree to help her. So Zeus sends Hermes to go tell Calypso that she needs to let Odysseus go. She is supposed to provide him with a simple vessel to make the journey home and not interfere either positively or negatively, and just like leave him alone, basically. So Hermes does this. He tells Calypso that she needs to let him go. She pushes back and is like, there are so many gods that have humans as their little playthings. Zeus has many by himself. Why can't I have this one? And he basically says that gods usually don't keep humans around for that long, and she has had him for 7 years on her island, and it's time to let him go. So she finally relents and agrees to release him. Meanwhile, Odysseus is sat on a rock, just staring out into the ocean. And all things considered, it's a very nice island. Like, it's beautiful. It's described as like a paradise. And you would think that being trapped on an island that's that beautiful with a goddess that is also beautiful. And I believe, if I remember correctly, she even offers to make him immortal too at one point. And it's really painted as this like supposed shining example of what a perfect life could be. Like, on paper, everything about this island is perfect, and he should be, theoretically, happy here. But alas, he is not. He still really wants to return home to Ithaca, even though he has been sleeping with Calypso. Like, I'm so sorry for my Epic the Musical fans, but Odysseus is not faithful in the Odyssey. To be fair, like, different time period, different expectations for husbands versus wives in the fidelity arena, but even so, I don't believe there's any version of the myth where Odysseus is actually faithful other than like modernized retellings that are like basically adjusting for societal norms of today. But yeah, Odysseus and Calypso throughout those 7 years do sleep together, and they do have children. But even so, all the while, Odysseus is dreaming of going home to Ithaca, to Penelope and Telemachus and his entire kingdom. So Odysseus is staring on a rock, staring out at the sea, when Calypso approaches him and basically tells him that she's going to let him go, and he will be able to make himself a raft, and she will provide him with food and provisions for the journey. He obviously, as you can expect, is very wary of this because it's seemingly coming out of nowhere. And he is like sure that it is some sort of trap, that he's going to build this raft and then he's going to like sail into another storm put on by the gods just to punish him again. Calypso then suggests that they have one more meal together before he leaves, and while they're eating, she asks him why he can't just be happy here. She starts talking about how she's beautiful, she's immortal, and that Penelope surely has aged. I mean, it's been 20 years and you can't expect her to look as she did when you left. Odysseus replies saying that she may not be as youthful as she once was. After all, in the 20 years that he has been gone, she's been dealing with a lot of stress between worrying about where he is, raising Telemachus basically on her own. I mean, she has like servants and things, but still, like, being the only parent can't be easy. She's also been taking care of the kingdom, taking care of Odysseus's parents as they age, and he is sure that she is going to still be beautiful to him, even if she has aged and her appearance has changed. He imagines that she will look more refined, like a beautiful, wise woman in her 40s, you know? And more important than all of that, she is still his wife, and so he will love her no matter what. And even with all the infidelity, that is a very sweet sentiment, and I do really appreciate that. Calypso then starts talking about how she has worked very hard to make this island a paradise, and clearly Ithaca must be even more beautiful reasonable for him to be so desperate to return there when he has this beautiful island at his disposal right now. And he starts saying that actually, no, Ithaca's really not that beautiful of an island. It's very rocky, not nearly as lush as this island is, and it's truly nothing compared to the splendor that she has built on her island. But Ithaca does have one advantage over literally anywhere else in the world, and that's the fact that it's his home. Later that evening, even after the lovely sentiment about how much he still loves Penelope, these two sleep together one last time for, old time's sake. And the next morning, he starts felling trees to build his raft to get back home. And it makes him think about how his father, Laertes, specifically taught him how to woodwork and build things like a raft with his bare hands because his dad believed that like self-sufficiency was really important and stuff like that, and how those skills that he learned at a young age are coming to use now. And it also makes him think back to when he and Penelope were building their palace in Ithaca. He starts thinking about when he was felling trees around the plot where they were going to build the palace, and there was a massive and what is described as an ancient olive tree, which this is an ancient Greek myth, and they're describing an olive tree as ancient. So it's a really, really old tree. And as he was about to start clearing that tree out too, Penelope begs him not to. And instead, what he does is he turns this ancient olive tree into their wedding bed. He carves out the middle of it, and that becomes their secret special place. And then he builds their bedchamber around that olive tree. And he thinks to himself that he will one day soon sleep in that bed again. Then Calypso shows up bringing the provisions that she promised him, and the two say goodbye as Calypso reiterates how much she loves Odysseus, and he sets sail for home. And then it says that he sails for 17 days, and on the 18th day he could finally see land. And while Zeus did command the gods not to interfere with his journey home, there was one person who either didn't get the memo or just didn't care. I would believe either, honestly, and that is Poseidon. So Poseidon has a bone to pick with Odysseus for reasons that we will get into in just a bit. But all you need to know right now is that he's very angry, very, very angry. And he's not about to let Odysseus get home that easily. Poseidon sends a storm that completely destroys Odysseus's raft. He's able to find a plank to hold on to. And then he sees a sea goddess appear in front of him. And this goddess is Ino, or the white goddess, the queen of the ocean. She tells Odysseus to undress and swim away from the broken raft towards the shore. She gives him this immortal veil to wrap around himself. I assume it protects him from being attacked, but it didn't really say. It just said it was an immortal veil. And she tells him that once he gets to shore, he needs to discard it and throw it back into the sea behind him. And he started to swim, and it apparently took him 2 days to swim to shore. And when he finally makes it to the shores of Phaeacia, he scrambles ashore and throws the veil back in the water, just as she tells him to. So we come back to join Odysseus, lying face down on the beach, naked, and quite honestly, looking very close to death. Odysseus is then found by a group of 16-year-old girls, basically, and all of them run away, scared, except for one. And it turns out that she is the princess. She gives him some clothes to put on so he's not just naked, but they're actually her clothes. So they don't exactly fit him right, and they look kind of silly, but it's better than nothing, I guess. And she tells him that she will take him to the palace where her mother will give him something better to wear, and they can get him cleaned up with food and all of that good stuff, because he is looking haggard. Odysseus arrives at the palace, and he is greeted by the king and queen. And after he gets all cleaned up, they sit down to dinner while a bard sings them tales of the Trojan War, not knowing that the stranger in their midst is the legendary King Odysseus of Ithaca. He then cries out for the bard to stop his singing because he is getting everything wrong and it is annoying him. And he says, I know the bard is getting everything wrong because I was actually there. And then he reveals that he is the lost king, Odysseus of Ithaca, and tells them to gather round because he will tell them what really happened. And we finally get to find out what the heck happened to this man for the last 10 years. So the last that we had heard of Odysseus after the fall of Troy was when they went to go pillage that nearby city in northern Greece, only to be attacked and lose 70 men and then get hit with the storm that sent Meneleus and Agamemnon far off course from home. Odysseus tells them that after they fixed up their ships, they set sail again and they ended up at a beautiful, lush island. He said it had grassy fields, chalk cliffs, babbling, beautiful springs and things, and thought to himself that these fields would be perfect for raising livestock. Yet, there's no sign of anyone raising any livestock on this island. And they don't raise livestock because the people on this island live off of lotus fruit. So when they land, Odysseus decides that they need to split up the men into two groups. One group staying by the beach to help repair boats and set up camp, and the other going to explore the island, do some foraging, that kind of thing. Odysseus then notices that the scouting group has disappeared for a very long time, and so he goes out looking for them. And as he's walking through this island, he's like noting how beautiful it is, how tranquil. And then he like literally trips over one of his men. He's like looking at how beautiful the trees are, all the flowers that are in bloom. And then he is bluntly interrupted when he literally trips over one of his men who is laying on the ground. And he's not injured or anything like that. No, he's laying on the ground and just like looking at the sky, giggling. And as he looks around, he sees that all of his men are laying on the ground, relaxing, giggling, and just looking very, very tranquil. Clearly, heavily intoxicated. Odysseus realizes that this is not like a normal kind of intoxication. They are not drunk, they are drugged. And puts together that the lotus fruit is controlling their minds, basically putting them into such a hazy and intoxicated state that they no longer desire to get home. They no longer care about anything but just laying in the fields and looking at the sky. Then one of the lotus eaters that lives there approaches Odysseus with some lotus fruit on a plate and offers it to him. Odysseus then like kicks the tray out of his hands, and the lotus eater like starts crying as he's like picking up the fruit off of the floor. And while he's doing that, Odysseus is like pulling up men from the ground, slapping them in the face, trying to like literally knock some sense into them. But it has very little impact on them, if any at all. Even when he talks about them leaving to go back home, they do not really budge. They tell him that they don't know what home he speaks of, but they really just want to stay and continue to lay in the sun. Odysseus then has to go back and like gather other men to come and help him literally carry these dudes back to the boat. He even had them tied down until the effects wore off. And Odysseus takes this moment to let us know that of all of the islands that he and his crew encountered, all of the dangers that they encountered, that he thinks that the lotus eaters were the most dangerous because of the way that the lotus fruit can so completely just wipe any desire you have to leave the island, and how it just controls your mind so completely. They set sail from that island, and then the next island that they end up on is an island populated with the Cyclopes. That's right, this is where our Cyclops come in. Odysseus tells his men that what they're going to do is they are going to take some of the wine that they got from that first city, from the priest that they didn't kill, and they are going to give it to the Cyclops as like a peace offering, if you will. So they dock their ships and they find a cave not too far away that is absolutely cavernous on the inside. This is the home to a Cyclops named Polyphemus, and Polyphemus is not home right now. So Odysseus and his men enter the cave, and when they enter, they see animal pens along the walls. He has sheep and goats in there. The wall is lined with cheeses, and there are buckets of milk and whey. And the men start to get excited. They talk about taking some of the cheese and say they should take as much cheese as they could carry, which honestly, quite a mood. Cheese is delicious. I too enjoy cheese, as well as take some of the animals. Odysseus stops them and says that they need to greet their host first and give him the offering of the wine in accordance with the rules of Xenia, as we talked about before. You don't want to be a disrespectful house guest. Just the same as you don't want to be a disrespectful host either. It goes both ways, okay? And showing up into someone's home and stealing their cheese and their livestock is not a good way to start. Especially not with the Cyclops, because they eat people. So the men agree, and two guys start a fire and they just sit there and wait for Polyphemus to return home. Once they heard him coming, they kind of like scooted back into a corner. And when he entered, he dropped a large load of firewood. Presumably he had been out gathering firewood and that's why he was not home. And then he rolled a large boulder over the entrance of the cave, trapping them all inside with him. The men then shrunk even farther into the shadows as Polyphemus greeted his goats and his sheep and sat down to start milking them. Now, this is a very interesting detail about Polyphemus. Even though he is a giant cyclops, he's described as ugly and like basically hard to look at. Like Odysseus's men get scared just looking at him. But then in juxtaposition with that, he is so kind and gentle with his goats and sheep. And he clearly cares about them a lot and has like special relationships with them. So it's just very interesting to see that like softer side of what is essentially a big scary monster. And like I said, just the sight of the Cyclops scared Odysseus's men. So one of them ends up gasping out of fear, and even though Polyphemus couldn't see them, he could hear them and he heard that gasp. He immediately accuses them of being like thieves or pirates or something, and Odysseus steps forward trying to like diffuse the situation, telling him that they're neither thieves nor pirates. They're actually Achaeans, they're Greeks, on their way home from war. And they ask for hospitality in the name of Zeus. Basically trying to request him to abide by the code of Xenia and be nice to them. But Polyphemus says that he does not care for Zeus. Actually, he is the son of Poseidon, which I don't know if that has anything to do with him saying he doesn't like Zeus, but he is the son of Poseidon. And he asks Odysseus where they docked their ship. Now, Odysseus knows that this is like a trap answer and that he shouldn't tell him where his ship is docked. So he says that actually they don't have a ship, that it broke apart in a storm and they swam to shore. Polyphemus doesn't say anything to this. All he does is he reaches out and he grabs two men, smashes their head on the ground, and then starts tearing them limb from limb and eating them. Yeah, like I said, they eat humans. He only kills the two, though, for now. I guess he was just hungry for a snack. I don't know. But then Odysseus and his men start talking about potentially killing the Cyclops. But the problem with that is if they kill the Cyclops before he moves the boulder from in front of the cave, they'll just be stuck in there. Because there is no way they can move that boulder on their own. They would be stuck in the cave and they would die. So they have to think of some other way to get out of the cave other than just going straight in for the kill with the Cyclops. The next morning when Polyphemus wakes up, he's hungry for some breakfast, so he grabs two more of Odysseus's men, smashes their heads like they're grapes, tears them apart limb from limb, and eats them, before going over to the boulder, moving it out of the way, and calling his sheep and goats out to the fields to graze for the day. He then placed the boulder back in front of the entrance of the cave so that even while he's gone, Odysseus and his men cannot escape. So instead, they start hatching a plan. Odysseus goes over to an ancient looking tree that's in this cave for some reason. I don't know how a tree grows in a cave that doesn't have any light, but there's a tree in there. So he cuts off a giant limb of it that he says is about the size of a human, and they begin to sharpen that into a giant spear, essentially. Then after the spear is sharpened, they roll it into the fire to like char it a little bit and harden it. And then they drew lots to decide who would help Odysseus use this giant wooden spear to stab Polyphemus in the eye. Polyphemus returned with his sheep and goats a bit later, and they could hear him outside of the cave, like through the boulder, like talking to his flock and being nice to them once again, which like is very sweet, but he also has killed 4 people so far. So let's keep that in mind. Just because he's nice to sheep and goats does not mean that he is a nice, I almost called him an ogre, a nice Cyclops. He then removes the boulder, draws the sheep and goats back in, and seals the entrance with the boulder once again. And when he's finished with this, he has apparently worked up an appetite, and he grabs 2 more of Odysseus's men, and you guessed it, smashes their heads, tears them limb from limb, and eats them. Odysseus then takes the wine that they brought with them initially and gives it to Polyphemus to wash down his meal. He gives it to him undiluted. Very important. Remember, if it's not diluted, it can basically knock you out. After drinking quite a bit of this wine, because remember, he's a big monster, so it does take a lot more to affect him than it would a regular human. So he has a lot of this wine, and then he asks Odysseus what his name is, in exchange for a gift. Odysseus tells him that his name is Nobody, because he's not about to give him his real name. Like, come on. Odysseus is a lot of things, but he ain't no fool, okay? At least not in this instance, he's not the fool. Sometimes he is, but not right now. Polyphemus then tells him that his gift to Odysseus is that Odysseus will be the last man that he kills and eats, before just starting to cackle wildly, and then he finally passes out from the wine. Odysseus and the men that have been chosen to act with him then roll the spear in the fire one more time just to get it hot, and they stab him in the eye. Polyphemus then roars so loud that it shakes the entire cave. Odysseus and his men scatter and hide as he hears the approaches of the other Cyclopes that live on this island. They began asking Polyphemus through the boulder that is essentially a door. They asked Polyphemus, why is he screaming and who is in the cave with him? Without missing a beat, Polyphemus replies that nobody is in the cave with him and nobody stabbed him in the eye. Obviously, thinking that Odysseus's name is Nobody. However, the other Cyclopes just hear him say, nobody's here, nobody stabbed me. And they're like, then why are you crying? And they basically tell him to be quiet before just leaving him there writhing in pain. Polyphemus then begins blindly thrashing around, like literally just thrashing his hand around, looking for Odysseus and his men in the cave. The men are able to evade him, and he gives up his frantic search after he accidentally kills a couple of his sheep in the process. And Odysseus begins to hatch another plan of how they're going to get out of the cave. Later that night, while Polyphemus is sleeping, Odysseus goes over to the remaining sheep and ram that are in the cave, and he begins tying the sheep together in groups of 3. He tells his men to go 1 man per group of 3 and hold on to the fleece on the underside of the middle one. Polyphemus, anticipating that they may try to ride the sheep out of the cave, and thinks that he will not think to look underneath the sheep, or feel underneath the sheep, rather. He's not looking at anything anymore. By the time he ties all of the sheep together, there is 1 large black ram left, and that is the one that Odysseus himself will ride underneath. The next morning, Polyphemus wakes up still in pain, still in agony, still very angry. But he manages to do the milking and get the boulder out from in front of the door to lead his flock outside. As the sheep go to exit the cave, he begins feeling their backs to make sure that Odysseus is not trying to ride the sheep out, just as he anticipated. And in the process, he does like give them extra pets and coo to them and stuff like that. He really does love the sheep that he tends to. And when the first group of 3 sheep come up, he doesn't think that they're tied together. He just thinks that they're like crowding to get out of the cave and thinks that they're just eager to get outside. And he does the same. He rubs their backs, but he does not check underneath the groups of 3 and just lets them go out to the field. So all of Odysseus's crew make it out this way, and he is the last one to exit the cave under the giant black ram. And apparently this giant black ram is Polyphemus's favorite because he spends a long time petting it and talking to it. He starts like nuzzling his face into the back of its fur and starts talking to it about how much he does not like Odysseus and his men. But he does eventually let the ram go out to the field, so Odysseus does make it out of the cave just fine. And once they made it out to the field, the men got out from under the sheep and they started driving the sheep over to their ship. And once they were on board with the livestock and everything, Odysseus tells us that this is where they should have just left. They should have just sailed away without doing anything else. But another theme in Greek mythology is the hubris of man. And this is where Odysseus's hubris gets the better of him, because it's not enough for him that he outsmarted the Cyclops, that he was able to get away using his wits. None of that is good enough for him. He's got to rub it in Polyphemus's face. And he can't stand the fact that Polyphemus doesn't actually know who blinded him. So Odysseus decides to start yelling at him from the boat things like, "That'll teach you to disrespect your guest. You're so dumb to think my name is Nobody. Only an idiot would believe that my name is Nobody. You can tell the world that you were maimed and bested by me, Odysseus, the king of Ithaca." Which, like, part of me wants to be like, yes, go off, king. Like, tell him who you are. Let him know, that kind of thing. But, like, lest we forget, Polyphemus's dad is Poseidon. You know who is infamous for, like, holding grudges and being very vengeful? Poseidon. So yeah, when Poseidon stopped Odysseus and just sent a storm to break apart his tiny raft that he had to build with his own 2 hands, That's why. He is very angry that he had the audacity to blind his son and then brag about it. Basically doxing himself, giving his name and home address. I remember someone said when I was watching a reaction to Epic the Musical when that part happens, that it's like robbing a bank and then being like, and just so y'all know, my name is Donald. And it really is, honestly. Like, it's so stupid. It's really so dumb of him to do. But, you know, like I said, even though he's clever, he's witty, he thinks fast on his feet, all of those things, don't get it twisted, okay? He's still real dumb sometimes. So, of course, when Odysseus does all of this taunting and leaves his name and address for him to follow up with, Polyphemus then shouts out a curse for Odysseus that his father hears about how he hopes that he never gets home, and if he does get home, that he struggles immensely to get there and all of this stuff. So after they leave Polyphemus's island, they end up sacrificing the great black ram that Odysseus rode out of the cave as an offering to Zeus for their safety and the souls of the men that Polyphemus killed. This sacrifice for the souls of the men who have been slain is a very important thing for them to do because there are very specific funeral rites and practices in ancient Greece, and properly honoring the dead is a big deal. So when we have these deaths that can't really go by the standard funeral rite practices that they're supposed to, this really weighs on Odysseus, because the thing about the funeral rites and practices is that the belief is that if they are not honored correctly, that their soul will be damned to wander forever and will never be able to rest in the underworld. This is an important element of the Iliad as well as the Odyssey. In the Iliad, we have the scene where Achilles disrespects Hector's dead body by literally dragging it behind his chariot for like days and refusing to return the body to the Trojans so that they can honor him properly. And that is like a big faux pas. And then in the Odyssey, we have all of these men that are being killed by these monsters that, you know, can't have a funeral pyre or a funeral shroud made for them, or even just like any sort of honoring, really. So it is very important that they took the time to sacrifice this ram and try to give those souls that Polyphemus killed a chance at not just being damned to wander restlessly forever. So the next stop that they make is at the Palace of the Wind with our friend Aeolus. And Odysseus and his men end up staying with Aeolus for about a month, where they basically just like hang out in his little like cloud island. And it gets to the point where Odysseus says that he's worried that his men will grow weak and fat the longer that they stay there, and that it might even be more dangerous for them there than it was on the Lotus Eater Island. But they did eventually leave, and when they did, Aeolus gives Odysseus this bag right here, actually. That is what Aeolus is holding. And in this bag, Aeolus has trapped all of the winds of the storms that are raging in the Mediterranean, except for Zephyrus, the west wind that will gently guide them home. He tells Odysseus that as long as they do not open the wind bag before they get home, they will reach home without any issue. And it took 9 days, but on the 10th day, they could finally spot Ithaca on the horizon. Now, feeling relieved with home in sight, Odysseus ends up falling asleep. Now, over those 9 days, the crew had been kind of whipping themselves up into a frenzy a little bit, because the word starts spreading that the bag is actually filled with treasure, and that the reason why Odysseus will not let them open the bag is because he does not want them to see all of the treasure that he took from Aeolus without sharing anything with them. Now, I don't remember if he actually tells them that this bag has the winds inside and that's why we need to keep it closed, or if he was told not to tell them what was in the bag and he just kind of keeps it a secret. But either way, the curiosity gets the better of them, and the crew opens up the wind bag when they are literally in sight of Ithaca. And when they do, of course, all of the winds that were trapped in there rush out, and it sends them flying across the Mediterranean. And when the winds die down, they realize that they have made it all the way back to Aeolus. Odysseus then asks Aeolus if he can help them once again, and Aeolus tells Odysseus that he obviously has angered a god and he doesn't want to be involved in that, so he's not going to help him again. So Odysseus and his men set sail again. Well, not sailing because there's no wind. They set rowing. They start trying to row their way home. And the men rowed for 6 days before they come across the island of the Laestrygonians. Now, Odysseus does posture a bit about the Laestrygonians. He kind of has this inner monologue thinking about how people say that they are cannibalistic, that they're a race of giants that eat humans, and how he's not sure if that's true. They send some small boats towards the shore to try to scope it out, and Odysseus sees from his ship at the back of the fleet his men running back towards their small boats and frantically trying to row back to the main ships. And out from the trees appear these giants. They're described as smaller than Polyphemus, but they are still giants compared to like regular men. And they come running out of the tree lines holding boulders that are the size of small houses. And they begin throwing them at the ships, trying to destroy them. Others then show up with spears and bows and arrows and start shooting the sailors that go into the water, essentially looking like they're hunting them for food, because low-key they kind of are. Odysseus then tells the men on his ship to cut the mooring lines that have them stationary so that they can get away, and he tells them to row as fast as they can. And since they are at the back of the fleet, they are the only ship that gets to escape. The other 11 ships get sunk, destroyed, and all of the men on board die. Odysseus is down to about like 40 or so men total at this point. Remember, he started with a crew of 600 at the end of the Trojan War. And as they sail away, Polyphemus's curse on him replays in his mind. They land on a new island, and Odysseus immediately goes out hunting, and while he's out, he sees smoke rising in the distance. He tells Eurylochus to take half of the remaining men to go scout it out, and the other half will stay back with Odysseus to clean and cook the stag that he just caught and also like set up camp for the evening. Eurylochus pushes back on Odysseus and says that he should go with half of the men, and Eurylochus will stay back and set up camp with the other half. They then agree to draw stone lots out of a helmet. There are half white stones, half black stones. Black stones will go do the investigating. White stones will stay and do the camp setup and stuff like that. And Eurylochus ends up drawing to go on the scouting mission, so he relents and goes on the scouting mission, while Odysseus and the rest of the men begin repairing the ship and setting up camp. A bit later, while they're still setting up camp, Eurylochus bursts back on the scene, absolutely frantic. They give him some of the wine, correctly diluted, and he calms down a bit before telling them what happened. He said that as they approached, they came to a clearing where there was an elegant villa surrounded by a beautiful garden. They could hear the sound of a woman singing inside of the villa as she worked on a loom. Suddenly, the loom stopped and a woman appeared in the doorway. She had 2 lions and 2 wolves next to her, who interacted with her like domestic pets. And she smiled at the men with her arms wide open, looking radiant as the sun. And all the men, except for Eurylochus, rushed forward towards her. Eurylochus even says, "I don't know why I didn't go forward, but I just couldn't." And he figured that she was probably some sort of goddess. And he watched as the men sat down at the stone table in the garden, and she served them wine. In the wine, she had mixed barley, honey, and some other herb-looking substance. The men eagerly drained the bowls that were given to them as she looked on, smiling. Then she pulled out a wand, pointed it towards them, and tapped each of them on the head. Their laughter soon turned into grunts and squeals, and Eurylochus watched in horror as they all turned from men into pigs. He tells Odysseus that she is a witch, and he could tell in the eyes of the pigs that they still had the consciousness of men, which is honestly horrifying. Eurylochus then says that they need to get off of this island, like now. But Odysseus refuses to lose any more men and decides to go after them. And here is our little witch lady. Her name is Circe. Odysseus didn't really have like a plan going into this. He just kind of marched off toward the villa. And as he stood in like the tree line observing, trying to work up the courage to go and confront Circe, who appears before him but Hermes, his great-grandfather. Hermes basically greets him and says, "Do you really think a sword is going to be enough to defeat someone like Circe?" And this is how Odysseus learns that her name is actually Circe. Now, Circe herself is actually pretty interesting. She is a very powerful enchantress with an interesting family history. She's the daughter of the Titan Helios, the sun god, and her sister is the one that birthed the Minotaur. Her niece is Medea, not to be confused with Tyler Perry's Medea. This Medea is a lot more sinister. She ends up murdering her children after her husband finds a younger wife. I don't think that happens in the Medea movies, but I could be wrong. And Hermes tells Odysseus that if he goes in, she will just give him the same drugged wine that she gave his men and turn him into a pig as well. But Hermes can give him a magic herb that will basically render her potion and her magic useless. This herb is called moly, and it is an herb that can only be pulled from the ground by a god, which is why Hermes can get it for Odysseus, but Odysseus cannot get it for himself. This is also why in Epic the Musical, in the song Wouldn't You Like, where Hermes first appears, this is why he has that joke where he says, and I call this root holy moly, because it's called moly, but it's holy because only a god can pull it from the ground. Very underrated joke, I would say. So he gives the plant to Odysseus. He is supposed to take this flower and basically chew it up in his mouth. It's very bitter, but it will counteract the potion in the wine, so he won't be turned into a pig at least. And he tells Odysseus that she will give him the wine. He will need to drink it, and then she will try to tap her wand on his head and turn him into a pig. And when she is distracted by her magic not working, this is when he needs to act. He needs to pull his sword and get it at her throat before she has a chance to do anything else. And then he needs to make her swear a divine oath. She needs to swear that she will not hurt him or use any magic against him. Hermes tells Odysseus that she will try to distract him and just like lure him straight into bed with her, but he needs to make sure that she swears this oath before he takes his sword away from her throat. And then he can sleep with her because, like we've already encountered before, fidelity is not really a big concern when it comes to Greek men, apparently. Then Hermes bends down and plucks a small plant with a white flower and black roots from the ground and gives it to Odysseus to chew up. Odysseus takes the plant, chews it up, and as he is like struggling with the bitter taste, Hermes disappears. Odysseus steps into the garden, and when he steps into the garden, the she-wolves that were by Circe's side come up to him and start licking his hand. Circe is a bit impressed by this, and she makes a remark that they actually like him. And Odysseus tells her that he is a stranger to the island, and he is very hungry and was wondering if she would be able to help him. So Circe invites him inside, eagerly. Obviously, she loves turning men into pigs. And she repeats the steps that Eurylochus had mentioned earlier. She mixes honey, barley, and a weird kind of herb into this wine before giving it to him. He then drinks it willingly. She tries to tap her wand on his head. And when she's confused that it's not working, Odysseus draws his sword and points it at her throat. Circe then shrieks, asking who he is before realizing that it is Odysseus. Apparently, Hermes has been telling her for years that one day his great-grandson Odysseus is going to show up and he's going to overpower her. So she knows exactly who he is just from like 2 seconds of interacting with him. She then does exactly what Hermes says she was going to do, and she tries to seduce him and convince him to put his sword away and just take her to bed so she can have sex with him and then kill him immediately afterwards. But Odysseus holds his sword steady to her throat, tells her that he knows exactly what she's doing, and he will only take her to bed if she swears a divine oath to not hurt him, use any magic against him, or prevent him from leaving the island. She agrees, and then, of course, they sleep together because why not, I guess? And when they hear activity outside, Circe tells Odysseus that it is her nymphs preparing a feast for them all. Some of the nymphs then come in and take Odysseus away to bathe and get ready for the feast, where he finally feels the weariness of the last few weeks melting away from his body. They dress him in a fresh tunic and take him to the feast, but he is unable to eat. Circe thinks that he's just being cautious, like he thinks maybe the food is poisoned or something. And she tries to encourage him to eat, but he tells her that he cannot eat like a prince when he knows that his men are being held captive as swine. He asks her to set them free and change them back into men, and then he will be able to eat. Circe then opens the pens, the pigs start like running around at her feet, and she takes this ointment and starts smearing it on their foreheads, and as she does so, they start to turn back into men. weeping with joy to be back in their human forms. Honestly fair, they probably thought they were going to spend the rest of their lives as pigs, which potentially wouldn't be too long depending on how often Circe likes to have roast pig for dinner. Circe then tells the men to go down to the beach and get the rest of their crew, and that they will all feast together. And all of the men are super excited about this except for Eurylochus. Eurylochus does not trust it, he just wants to leave, but he is basically stuck there for the time being because he is outnumbered. He does eventually relent and join, and once there they all start feasting and enjoying the spoils of Circe's island. They spend a few weeks there, and then the weeks turn into months. The months turn into like a whole year there. And of course, this whole time, Circe and Odysseus are sleeping together. So after a year, Circe is pregnant and she gives birth to a son. After a full year there, Odysseus is approached by some of his men and they're like, hey, remember how we were like trying to get home? Can we get back to that now? Odysseus then goes to Circe and tells her that they need to leave the island and start their journey back to Ithaca again. Circe then tells Odysseus about a vision that she has had. She tells Odysseus that he will never reach home unless he goes to the underworld to consult with the blind prophet Tiresias. Now, I believe there are several myths surrounding how Tiresias became the blind prophet. The one that I'm most familiar with is that he was blinded because he looked upon Athena while she bathed naked. And Athena's like very famously a maiden goddess. So she punished him by taking his sight, but then kind of felt bad for him and gave him the vision of the future to kind of make up for it. And the ability to understand birdsong because she couldn't undo what she had already done to make him blind. Circe tells Odysseus that Tiresias is the only one who can tell him how to get home. Odysseus protests because he's like, no one can go into the realm of the underworld. How am I supposed to talk to him if I'm in the land of the living and he is in the land of the dead? Circe then gives him very specific instructions on how he is meant to summon Tiresias's shade. She tells Odysseus that they are to sail north. Once they get to the flat shores of the Grove of Persephone, that is where they're able to beach their ships. And from there, they have to hike towards where the river of the underworlds meet. And that is where they need to start digging a ditch. In this ditch, they should put milk, honey, a sprinkle of barley on top. And then they have to take a black ram and a white ewe, have them face the underworld entrance, and slit their throats so the blood will drain into the pool as well. This weird concoction apparently is a favorite drink amongst the shades. I don't know exactly why, but they go crazy for this stuff apparently. And she tells Odysseus that they're gonna have shades coming at them left and right, trying to get a taste of this weird milk, blood, honey, barley concoction. And they're going to have to hold off all the other shades until Tiresias comes forward. He must be the first one to drink out of this little ditch in the ground. And once he comes forward to get a drink, that is when they can ask him the questions that they need to. And after they get this information out of him, then they can just let the other shades drink their fill. Circe then provides them with everything they're going to need for that little like potion thing. She gives them the milk, honey, barley, the ram, the ewe, all of it. And she also gives them provisions for the trip there and also the trip from there back to Ithaca. So she gives them a lot, honestly. So they load all of this onto their ship and get ready to depart. And as they were preparing to leave, there was one crewmate who apparently was like sleeping on the roof of Circe's villa. I don't know why he was up there, but he was up there. His name is Elpenor. And he wakes up on the roof, sees that they are getting ready to sail away without him. And he frantically tries to make his way to the ship, but he ends up falling off of the roof and breaking his neck and dying on Circe's island. They have a smooth journey to the spot that Circe directed them to. And as they were journeying on foot to the opening of the underworld, they notice the fog start to roll in. It starts to get darker. The temperature starts to drop. You can just like tell that you're getting close to the entrance of the underworld. It gets real spooky. And they make it to the spot that Circe had told them about, and Odysseus starts digging a ditch in the ground to fill it with the milk and honey, etc. They then send up prayers for those they have lost so far before slitting the throats of the ewe and the ram and letting the blood drain into the pool. And almost immediately, the shades start going wild. They start trying to get at this bloody concoction in the ground. And the very first shade that they see is none other than Elpenor, the guy who just fell off the roof and died on Circe's island. He tells Odysseus that because they did not bury his body or do any of the customary funeral rites, he is doomed to be eternally restless, just as we talked about earlier. Odysseus then promises him that they will go back to Circe's island, bury his body, give him the funeral rites so that he can actually have a restful afterlife. Elpenor then fades away, and Tiresias appears. Tiresias tells them that he will tell them what they want to know after he has drank his fill from the little ditch. And once he has quenched his ghostly thirst, he tells Odysseus that his actions with Polyphemus has angered Poseidon, and it will take a lot to placate Poseidon. Despite being the god of the sea, he's not a very laid-back surfer type. He is actually a very, very vengeful god, as are a lot of the gods. A lot of the gods are very, very petty, vengeful. They have very human qualities, let's say. Tiresias then tells Odysseus that they will have a lot of decisions to make on their way back home, and the choices that they make will determine their fate. He tells Odysseus that he can find his way home, and he can even do so swiftly and easily if he makes the right choices. He tells Odysseus that his ship will land on the island where Helios keeps his immortal flock of sheep and cattle that he loves dearly. And if they leave these animals alone and do not harm them in any way, shape, or form, they will be just fine. But if they even so much as harm a single one of his beloved sheep or cattle, there will be immense losses. He says that he will lose his ship, every last one of his crew members, and it will take him years to finally return home. And eventually, when he does make it back home, he will find his palace overrun with rapacious suitors who degrade his palace and run amok on his lands, all in the pursuit of his wife's hand in marriage, believing that he died at sea years prior. He then tells him that though he will eventually make it home and reunite with his family, he will soon need to leave again in search for a land whose people do not know of the sea and sailing and who use no salt. He says they will not even know what an oar is. So when he shows up with an oar on his shoulder, a stranger will greet him and ask him why he is carrying a winnowing fan, and he is to plant the oar in the ground and make a sacrifice to Poseidon, and as he makes his way back home, an additional sacrifice to each of the 12 Olympians as well. If he does this, then he will live prosperously and die of old age surrounded by loved ones. Odysseus accepts this prophecy and thanks Tiresias before he disappears. After Tiresias fades away, Odysseus then recognizes his mother in the crowd of shades. And this makes Odysseus very sad because up to this point, he was under the impression that his mother was still alive and waiting for him back in Ithaca. So this is how he finds out that his mom has died, which is such a horrible way to find out, honestly. It's like some myths say that his mother Anticlea died when they got close to Ithaca the first time. It's said that she saw his boat on the horizon, and then when it got pulled away by the storm, when the crew opened the windbag, she threw herself into the sea. Other versions say that she died of grief, of a broken heart, from him being gone so long. But either way, she definitely died of grief, whether she threw herself into the ocean or she just died of a broken heart. Either way, she died waiting for Odysseus to return home, and that is sad. Very sad. He then asks her about an update of what was going on in Ithaca up to the point where she passed away, and she tells him that his father Laertes is still alive, but age has not been kind to him. She tells him that Laertes lives alone in his farmhouse and misses Odysseus dearly. She tells him that Penelope mourns for him as well, and that she has been faithful to him and longs for him to return. She also tells him that Telemachus has grown into a fine young boy, and that he will be so proud of him when he returns. But he must hurry, because the longer that he's away, the more dangerous this whole succession crisis becomes, and the more pressure Penelope is under to choose a new king to take his place. Odysseus then tries to hug Anticlea, but because she is just a shade, he cannot actually hold her. His arms just pass right through her, which is also very, very sad. Then after she fades away, another shade approaches and Odysseus recognizes that it is Agamemnon. And this is another gut punch for him. And he asks Agamemnon if he passed away in the storms after the fall of Troy. He tells him that actually we made it through the storms just fine. I died at the hands of my wife when I returned back home. And he says that dying at sea would have probably been preferable to the death that he had, before recounting the whole ugly, murderous affair to Odysseus. Agamemnon then asks Odysseus if he knows anything of his children and what became of them. Agamemnon says that he doesn't think that they're dead because he has not seen them in the underworld. And Odysseus says that he does not know anything about what happened to his children. And when he looks back on Agamemnon, he says that he looks very pitiful, and it enrages him that the king of men has been reduced to this poor state in the afterlife. Agamemnon then fades away, and the last shade that Odysseus sees in the underworld, or I guess at the mouth of the underworld, is Achilles. And this is one shade that Odysseus is like not super upset to see, just because he already knows that Achilles is dead, and so it's not a surprise to see him here. He asks Achilles about the underworld, the afterlife. He tells him excitedly about how bards all across Greece sing of him and his bravery in the Trojan War, and that he is truly a legendary hero. Achilles tells him that it is not a very good afterlife. He says that Asphodel does not have any meaning. It doesn't have any hope to it. He compares it to a peach that has been sucked of all of its juice. He remarks that being the prince of the shades and celebrated as a great hero has not been what he thought it would be, and tells Odysseus that he would have rather died a poor farmer in obscurity than be a ruler of a kingdom of the dead. He then ends his whole rant about how unhappy he is in the afterlife by begging Odysseus to live his life to the fullest every single day and appreciate what he has in the world of the living. That's really comforting, right? After this encounter, Achilles disappears, and they leave as the shades start heading back to the underworld. They board back on their boat and they head back to Circe's island as promised to bury Elpenor. But by the time they get there, they are so exhausted that they literally only have the energy to drag their bodies onto the beach, and they just collapse on the beach. Circe's nymphs end up finding them there and start bringing them like food and wine. And once they had eaten and kind of recovered a little bit, Odysseus then sent a group of men to go get Elpenor's body so that they could have a proper burial for him. They build a funeral pyre, they honor Elpenor's body, and do all the things to ensure that he is at rest in the afterlife. And that's when Circe comes down to the beach to see what's going on. She tells them that they can stay, feast, and frolic, but they have to be gone before the sun rises on the next day. And of course, not wanting to miss the opportunity, Odysseus takes Circe to bed. And as they lay in bed together, Circe begins to inform him of the trip that they have ahead of them. Yes, that's right, friends. We are only about halfway through my notes right now. So we got a lot of story left to cover, and there is still quite a bit lying ahead of Odysseus before he is able to return home. And honestly, with that, I think we're gonna draw a line here for this video, and we will get into what is essentially the second half of Odysseus's journey home in the next video. So yeah, I will make sure to get part 2 up as soon as possible so that we can finish out this journey. There's a lot going on, a lot of characters on the wall, and we still got more to come. So yeah, look forward to that. I hope you guys enjoyed this part 1 of the Odyssey. I know I took some detours in some places, but hopefully it all made sense. Hopefully I did a decent enough job walking you through what's going on with all of these characters. There are so many names that like, I could probably fill this wall 3 times with pictures of characters if I were to try to find visual representations for like every single character that shows up more than once in this story. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below. Let me know. You should also subscribe while you're down there so you know when I put out new videos. I want to do some more of these like plot summary type videos in the future. So if you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed my Wuthering Heights plot summary video, then definitely go ahead and subscribe, because I have a few more books that I want to do plot summaries like this for before the year is over, and hopefully it won't take me too long to get those out. I know I've been a bit MIA recently, but I'm just trying my best to survive in this life, man. So if I disappear sometimes, it's more than likely because I just need some time away from the internet, especially in this current timeline that we're in. Gotta take some mental health breaks sometimes, but in any case, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you next time with the rest of the Odyssey. Bye!